I should have known better than to mess with something like this. I had watched enough horror stories, read enough Reddit threads, and seen enough dark web unboxing videos to know that these things were never a good idea. And yet, on a cold, sleepless night, scrolling through endless clickbait, I found myself on some shady website, one that didn't look like the typical overpriced, mystery box scams. There was no flashy design, no cartoonish skulls, no exaggerated warnings. Just a black screen, a blinking cursor, and a single line of text, for those who crave the unknown. The description wasn't elaborate, it simply promised a unique experience, personalized to you. Something about that phrase hooked me. Personalized? I assumed it was just a marketing trick, a way to make people feel special when, in reality, they were just getting a box full of junk. Maybe an old doll with a stitched-up mouth, a fake human tooth, or a bloody shirt that looked like it had been dragged across a dirty floor. That's what I thought I was paying for. Just a gimmick. Something I could laugh about later. So, against every rational thought, I pulled out my credit card, typed in the details, and clicked Order. The confirmation page didn't ask for my name. It didn't even ask for my address. It already knew. The box arrived exactly 3 days later, no return label, no branding, just a plain, black cardboard box sitting on my doorstep. There was no knock on the door, no delivery notification. Just a box, waiting for me, as if it had been there all along. The moment I picked it up, something felt wrong. It wasn't heavy, but it had an odd weight distribution, like whatever was inside wasn't just sitting still. As if something had been carefully placed in a way that it needed to be opened in a specific order. I brought it inside, shut the door, and placed it on the kitchen table. My fingers hovered over the top flap for a moment, hesitation creeping up my spine like a slow-moving shadow. I laughed at myself for being paranoid, took a deep breath, and tore the box open. Inside, there was no dramatic fake blood, no childish attempt at horror. Instead, there was something far worse. At the very top, carefully placed as if it were the first thing I needed to see, was a photograph, an old, worn photo of me as a child. My heart stopped. The picture wasn't just from my childhood, it was from my 5th birthday. A moment I barely even remembered, but I knew it was real because my mother used to keep it in a silver frame in our living room. But that frame had been broken years ago, and the picture itself had been lost in some old storage box. So how the hell was it here, inside this package? I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling as I dug deeper. Beneath the photo, there was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, as if it had been sitting in some dark place for years, waiting for this exact moment. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the words written in a neat, deliberate hand. You made a mistake. Just 3 words, nothing more. Yet those words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My head jerked toward my front door, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in around me. Had someone been here? Had someone watched me open the box? I glanced at the window, nothing but the dark street outside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The room felt different now, like the air itself had shifted. I should have thrown the whole thing away, tossed it in the trash, burned it, anything. But curiosity, or maybe something far worse, kept me rooted to the spot. I reached into the box again, hoping, praying, that the next item wouldn't be worse than the last. But then, my fingers brushed against something metal. A key. Not just any key. A key I recognized. My heart slammed against my ribs as I pulled it out, turning it over in my palm. It was my spare house key. The one I kept in my desk drawer. The one I hadn't used in years. And that's when I realized, someone had been inside my home before I ever opened the box. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the key so hard my fingers ached, my mind struggling to rationalize the impossible. Someone had been inside my home. Not just lurking outside, not just watching from the shadows, but actually inside. That realization settled into my bones like ice, freezing me in place as a new, far more terrifying thought took shape. If they had access to my house, my things, my life, then how long had they been watching me? How long had I been nothing more than a character in their twisted little game? My breath felt too loud in the suffocating silence, my own home suddenly foreign, as though it had been tainted by something unseen, something I couldn't take back. And yet, despite the primal fear clawing at my gut, some morbid, self-destructive instinct forced me to keep going, my hands diving deeper into the box, searching for whatever nightmare lay beneath. My fingers wrapped around something small, cold, smooth. When I pulled it out, I nearly dropped it. A USB drive. No label, no markings, just a simple black stick that, despite its size, felt heavier than anything I had ever held. My instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to get rid of everything, to burn the box and pretend none of this ever happened. But the damage was already done. I had opened the door. And now, there was no closing it. I forced myself to sit at my desk, my pulse hammering against my ribs as I plugged the drive into my laptop. The screen flickered, a brief static distortion rippling across the display before it stabilized. One single file. No name, no date. Just a blank, gray icon sitting there, waiting. My hand hovered over the trackpad, my finger hesitating just above the play button. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and clicked. The screen went black for a moment, and then the video began. It was my bedroom. The camera angle was low, tilted slightly, as though someone had been crouching in the corner. The timestamp in the corner of the screen confirmed my worst fear, it had been recorded last night. My stomach twisted as I watched myself sleep, my body rising and falling with slow, steady breaths, completely oblivious to the presence of whoever, whatever, was filming. The footage was grainy, the lighting dim, but the longer I watched, the more my skin prickled with the unbearable sensation that something was off. And then, slowly, so agonizingly slow I almost didn't catch it, the closet door in the background began to creak open. Not all the way. Just enough. Just enough for a hand to slip through. My blood ran cold. The hand was pale, long-fingered, too thin to be normal, too still to be human. I wanted to look away, I wanted to close the laptop and never open it again, but I was paralyzed, my breath caught in my throat as the hand withdrew, the closet door easing shut without making a sound. The recording continued for another 30 minutes, nothing happening except for the sound of my own breathing. Then, just as I thought the video had ended, just as I started to believe maybe, I had imagined the hand, the camera lurched forward. The angle tilted up, closing in on my sleeping face, closer, until the screen was filled with nothing but darkness. A whisper. Barely audible, so soft I almost didn't hear it. But when I did, I felt my entire body lock up in pure, unfiltered horror. Because the voice, low, rasping, inhuman, was saying my name. I slammed the laptop shut so hard I heard the plastic casing crack. My heart was pounding so fast I thought it might burst straight through my ribs. I turned, scanning the room, every shadow suddenly deeper, every corner a void where something might be hiding, watching. My closet door was closed, just as I had left it. But was it? Had I checked? Had I really checked? My entire body tensed as I took slow, measured steps toward it, each one heavier than the last, each one dragging me closer to a revelation I didn't want. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle, sweat slick against my palm. I held my breath, counted to 3, and yanked the door open. Empty. Just clothes, shoes, boxes of old junk. Nothing out of place. Nothing unusual. But as I stood there, staring into the yawning darkness of my own closet, a realization slithered into my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a cold, bony hand. The hand in the video, it had withdrawn. The door had shut. But I had never seen who it belonged to. I had never seen them leave. So where were they now? My stomach lurched. I took a staggering step back, my foot hitting something soft. I turned too fast, my breath catching in my throat. The mystery box. The one I had just opened. It was sitting at my feet again, sealed. My breath caught in my throat as I stared down at the box, now sitting neatly in front of me, its edges perfectly aligned, its top still tightly sealed. My mind screamed at me, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to convince me that maybe, just maybe, I had only imagined opening it. But I knew better. My hands had torn through the cardboard, had pulled out the objects one by one, had felt the chill of that old photograph, had trembled while holding the USB drive. And yet, here it was, as if I had never touched it. A slow, creeping horror crawled up my spine, sending ice into my veins, as a new, more terrifying thought surfaced. If the box was back, did that mean everything inside had returned too? My entire body felt tense, the air around me pressing in, suffocating, filled with an unseen presence I couldn't define. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, the kind that carried weight, as if something unseen was watching, waiting for me to notice it. My fingers twitched as I reached forward, hesitating just inches above the cardboard. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to leave it alone, to walk away, to run, to burn it, to never touch it again. But some sick, twisted part of me, the same part that had ordered the damn thing in the first place, needed to know. Needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. So, with shaking hands, I grabbed the edge of the tape and pulled. The box opened with a slow, sickening tear, the sound unnaturally loud in the empty room. I braced myself for what I might find, expecting to see the same childhood photo, the same letter, the same horrifying message written in that neat, deliberate script. But what I found instead made my stomach lurch. A single Polaroid. It wasn't old, wasn't yellowed with age like the first photograph. This one was new. Crisp. Fresh. My fingers trembled as I lifted it out of the box, tilting it toward the light. The image sent a violent shiver through my entire body, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Because the photograph, it was of me. Sitting exactly where I was sitting right now. My laptop was open, my hands hovering over the mystery box, my expression frozen in horrified confusion. But that wasn't what made my stomach twist into knots, what made my entire body lock up with sheer, inescapable dread. It was the second figure. The one standing directly behind me. My grip on the photo loosened, my fingers slick with sweat, my entire body too afraid to turn around. My mind screamed at me, begged me not to move, not to react, not to acknowledge it, as though somehow, if I ignored it, it wouldn't be real. But I could feel it now. The presence. The weight of unseen eyes drilling into my back. The sickening sensation of breath, cold, shallow, inhuman, brushing against the side of my neck. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in place, my mind unraveling, my body refusing to respond. The room felt impossibly small, suffocating, wrong. My skin prickled, my pulse hammering so violently I thought my ribs might crack beneath the pressure. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the feeling was gone. The air shifted, the weight lifted, the invisible force that had been looming behind me simply vanished. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to breathe, to regain control over my body. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the photograph. The room was empty now, or at least, it looked empty. I knew better than to trust my own eyes. Something was happening, something far beyond what I could understand. Something was playing with me. I turned back to the mystery box, still open, still waiting. There was only one thing left inside. A single slip of paper, folded neatly, resting against the bottom. I reached for it, my pulse thundering in my ears as I unfolded it with trembling hands. One sentence. Typed. Precise. Unmistakable. You left your closet door open again. The note in my shaking hands felt heavier than it should, the ink practically sinking into my skin as if it had been burned there instead of simply printed. My mind raced, desperately trying to remember, had I left my closet open? Was it possible I had carelessly forgotten to close it? The thought twisted in my gut like a sickness because I knew the answer. No. I hadn't left it open. I had checked it. I had checked twice. My chest tightened as my breathing became erratic, a sharp pressure coiling around my ribs like a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt forced. It was as if the air itself was waiting, anticipating my next move, watching for my reaction. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to look, not to turn around, not to give in to the crushing certainty that someone, was in that room with me. My fingers gripped the note so tightly the paper crumpled, my knuckles bloodless, sweat pooling at the back of my neck as my gaze shifted, against my better judgment, toward the closet door. The door was ajar. Just slightly. No more than a few inches. But I knew with every fiber of my being that it had been closed. My muscles locked, every inch of me stiff and frozen as a suffocating fear pressed against my skull, making it nearly impossible to think, to move, to breathe. The space beyond the crack was pure darkness, impenetrable, a void that seemed to swallow the dim light of my apartment. I couldn't see anything, but that was almost worse. Not seeing. Not knowing. The silence stretched, thick and unbroken, but beneath it, beneath the sound of my own pounding heartbeat, I thought I heard it, the faintest shift, a slow inhale, something waiting just beyond the sliver of open space. My throat tightened, the pulse in my ears drowning out every rational thought. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some stupid prank or a figment of my overactive imagination. Something was in there. And it had been watching me long before I ever realized it. I moved before I could think, my survival instincts kicking in with the force of sheer desperation. I lunged for the closet, my hand slamming against the door, forcing it shut with a brutal, deafening bang that echoed through the empty apartment. My breath hitched, my skin crawling with the overwhelming, unbearable sensation that I had just trapped something inside. The air felt suffocating, thick with something unseen, something I couldn't explain, something that made my entire body ache with the knowledge that I had made a mistake. My fingers fumbled against the doorframe as I scrambled to grab something, anything, to wedge against it, to keep it shut, to stop whatever was inside from getting out. A chair, a heavy box, my own weight pressed against the wood, my muscles trembling as I struggled to hold it there, as if some unseen force was waiting for me to fail. I needed to leave. Now. I needed to get out, to run, to forget this ever happened. But before I could move, before I could take a single step away from that godforsaken door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. My breath stilled, my hand shaking as I reached for it, as I forced myself to look at the screen, my stomach twisting into a violent, ice-cold knot. A message. From an unknown number. I hesitated, every part of me screaming not to open it. But I did. And when I did, I felt my entire world tilt into something unrecognizable, something so sickeningly wrong that for a moment, I thought I might pass out. The message was only 2 words. 2 words that shattered every fragile thread of sanity I had left. Behind you. The message on my phone burned into my vision, 2 simple words tearing apart every ounce of logic I had left, unraveling my sense of reality thread by thread. Behind you. I couldn't breathe. My entire body locked up, frozen in place, my muscles refusing to obey the primal instinct to run, to escape, to do anything but stand there, drowning in the suffocating weight of fear. The room felt smaller now, as if the very walls were closing in around me, trapping me inside with something I could not see. I wanted to turn around, to confirm that there was nothing there, that my paranoia was feeding on itself, but some deep, ancient part of my mind, the part that understood survival, screamed at me that if I turned, if I so much as acknowledged its presence, it would be too late. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. Something had been here all along, watching, waiting for me to realize it. And now it knew that I knew. The silence stretched thin, unnatural, heavy with the weight of something unseen, something holding its breath right along with me. Then, in that awful, crushing stillness, the sound came. Knock. 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 The sound wasn't coming from the front door. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my apartment. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, the kind that didn't just demand attention but expected it. My throat went dry, my pulse hammering so hard against my skull that I thought my head might explode. The sound wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate, it was patient. Calculated. Like whatever was knocking already knew what I was going to do next. My eyes darted to the closet, my mind racing. Had I locked it? Had I really locked it? I had been so panicked, so terrified, I couldn't remember if I had actually slid the bolt into place or if I had only imagined it. The knocking came again. Knock. 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 This time, closer. My stomach twisted violently, nausea rising in my throat like bile. It wasn't coming from the closet anymore. My breath hitched, my fingers tightening around my phone as the realization hit me like a truck going full speed. The sound had moved. Whatever was knocking, was no longer behind the door. I felt it then, a shift in the air, a presence so close it made my skin crawl, like ice water trickling down my spine. My fingers clenched the phone so hard my knuckles ached, my heart slamming against my ribs as I forced myself to look, to finally turn around and face whatever nightmare had been waiting for me in the dark. The room was empty. At least, it looked empty. But the air felt different, wrong, like I had just stepped into a space that didn't quite belong to me anymore. The silence returned, stretching long and unnatural, pressing against my ears, drowning out the sound of my own pulse. I took a slow step forward, my body on autopilot, my mind screaming at me to get out, to run, to never come back. And then, just as I reached for the doorknob, the lights flickered. Not a normal flicker, not a brief dimming caused by a faulty bulb, but a violent, stuttering pulse, as if something was inside the wiring, crawling through the circuits, clawing its way through my walls. My phone vibrated again, and this time, when I looked, I didn't even have the strength to scream. The message was different now. A picture. A blurry, dark image that took my brain a second too long to process, my nerves scrambling to understand what I was seeing. It was my front door. From the inside. Taken just seconds ago. And in the lower right-hand corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a hand. Not reaching for the doorknob. Not knocking. Just waiting. Waiting for me to open it. Waiting for me to let it in. I couldn't move. My breath hitched, my body frozen in place, my mind struggling to process the image glaring back at me from my phone screen. The hand. It wasn't pressing against the door. It wasn't reaching for the knob. It was just, waiting. The longer I stared, the more I realized how unnatural it looked, too long, too thin, the fingers slightly curled as if anticipating something. My stomach twisted violently, every cell in my body screaming at me to do something, anything. But the fear had taken root so deeply inside me that even my own limbs refused to cooperate. Then, as if on cue, my phone vibrated again, another message appearing just below the first. Open it. My legs nearly gave out. Every survival instinct I had left was roaring inside my skull, demanding I run, but the sheer wrongness of the situation kept me pinned where I stood. This wasn't just someone messing with me. This wasn't a break-in. This wasn't normal. I forced my gaze toward the front door, my throat tightening as I noticed something I should have seen before. The chain lock. It was undone. My breath came fast and uneven, panic rising in sharp, suffocating waves. I knew for a fact that I had locked it. I always did. But now, somehow, it was undone, swaying ever so slightly as if someone had just let go of it. My skin crawled, the heavy silence stretching so unbearably thin that I almost screamed just to break it. Then, the knocking returned. Knock. 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 Slow. Rhythmic. But closer this time. It wasn't coming from the door anymore. I turned sharply, my pulse slamming against my ribs, my heart feeling like it might crack my chest open from the sheer force of it. The sound was coming from inside my apartment. My mouth went dry, my thoughts shattering under the weight of the realization. It wasn't the closet this time. It wasn't the door. It was the walls. A soft, deliberate tapping from within the drywall, from inside places where no one, nothing, should be. The knocking moved, shifting along the walls, methodical, as if something was crawling just beyond the surface, tracking my every breath. The realization hit me like a freight train, nearly knocking the air from my lungs. It had never been outside. It had never been knocking to come in. It had already been here. My hands were shaking, my fingers slick with sweat as I backed away, my body pressing against the farthest wall, my mind racing through every possible escape route. But deep down, I already knew the truth. There was nowhere to run. There never had been. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, a heavy, waiting stillness that pressed against my skin like something tangible, something alive. I stayed against the wall, my breath shallow, my hands gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. The air in my apartment had changed, thicker, charged, as if it had weight. I could feel something shifting around me, something just out of sight, something that had always been there but had only now begun to make itself known. My mind raced, scrambling for answers, desperate to piece together the fragments of logic that had been shattered since the moment I opened that damn mystery box. But then, almost as if it had been listening, as if it knew I was trying to understand it, my phone buzzed again. Another message. My throat tightened as I forced myself to look at the screen, already knowing that whatever I was about to read was going to change everything. You should have read the terms. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the air in my lungs thinning as a sudden, brutal realization snapped into place. The website. The one where I had ordered the box. I hadn't paid attention, hadn't questioned how it already knew my name, my address, my life. I had assumed it was just another scam, just another weird corner of the internet where people sold fake haunted objects to idiots looking for a thrill. But now, standing in the dark, trapped in an apartment that no longer felt like my own, I understood something far worse. This had never been a game. My fingers moved frantically over the screen, pulling up my browser, my heart slamming against my ribs as I forced myself back onto the site. But the moment the page loaded, my stomach dropped. It was different now. The simple, blinking cursor was gone, replaced by a single phrase at the top of the page. Your selection process has begun. Below it, a grainy, black and white live feed flickered onto the screen. At first, I couldn't process what I was looking at. The image was distorted, the contrast too sharp, the shadows stretching too long. But then I saw it. My apartment. The camera was inside my apartment. I staggered back, the phone nearly slipping from my grip as my eyes darted around the room, searching for it, searching for the lens that had been watching me this entire time. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was what I saw next. The feed shifted, the angle changing as if the camera was moving on its own, adjusting. And then, in the farthest corner of my screen, something emerged from the shadows. A figure. Tall. Unnaturally thin. Its limbs elongated, its head tilting in a way that made my stomach twist violently. And then, as if it could hear me watching, it turned. Slowly. Deliberately. And before the feed cut to static, I saw its face, or rather, the complete absence of one. My phone buzzed again, the last message appearing before my screen went dark. Your box has been accepted. There is no refund. The screen went black, my phone slipping from my trembling hands, the weight of reality pressing down on me with crushing force. There was no way out of this. No way to explain it away, no way to rationalize what I had just seen. My apartment, my home, wasn't mine anymore. It had become something else entirely, a stage for something I didn't understand, something that had chosen me. I wanted to run, to throw open the door and bolt into the night, to leave everything behind and pretend none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't move. Because I knew it wouldn't matter. It had already found me. The moment I opened that box, the moment I let whatever this was into my life, I had sealed my fate. My breathing was ragged, my chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven bursts as my mind scrambled for a solution, for a way out, for a single sliver of hope. But there was none. There was only the silence, the heavy, waiting quiet that stretched through the room like an open mouth, ready to swallow me whole. And then my laptop screen flickered. The final video had started. I didn't want to watch it. I didn't want to see what was coming next, to witness whatever nightmare had been waiting for me from the beginning. But my body moved on its own, my hand reaching out, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as if someone, was guiding me. The screen pulsed, static crawling across the edges, the distorted feed flickering into existence. It was my apartment again. The same grainy black and white footage from before. Only this time, I wasn't sleeping. I was sitting exactly where I was now. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat as I watched the figure on the screen, myself, staring at the monitor, watching the same video, trapped in the same endless loop. And then, the camera shifted, the angle tilting slightly to the left, revealing something behind me. I didn't want to look. I couldn't look. But my reflection, my double on the screen, did. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned his head, his expression frozen in wide-eyed horror as the shadow behind him shifted, as the darkness twisted and coiled into something that should not exist. And then, as if sensing me, as if knowing that I was watching, he raised his hand. Not to fight. Not to resist. But to reach out, to the screen, to me. The lights in my apartment flickered violently, the air crackling with something unnatural, something beyond comprehension. My fingers dug into the desk, my pulse a frantic, uneven drum against my skull. And then, just before the screen cut to black, just before the video ended with a final, deafening silence, my reflection mouthed something, his lips forming a single word. Run. But it was already too late. A shadow passed behind me. I spun around so fast that my chair nearly toppled over, my lungs seizing as I braced for whatever was behind me. But there was nothing. At least, nothing I could see. The room was dimly lit, the glow from my laptop screen casting deep, stretched shadows along the walls, making everything look warped, unnatural. But I knew something was there. The air felt thick, suffocating, filled with an unseen weight pressing down on me, as if I were being smothered by something just beyond the edge of my perception. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of the apartment, to leave everything behind before it was too late. But my body wouldn't move. The only sound was the uneven, ragged breaths tearing their way out of my throat, the silence so complete that I could almost hear the blood rushing in my ears, the trembling beat of my own panicked heart. And then, the door to my apartment unlocked. Not the deadbolt, I had already checked that, had made sure it was sealed, had triple-checked it. No, it was the chain lock, the one that should have been impossible to undo from the outside. My stomach twisted violently, bile burning the back of my throat as the metal slid out of place, slow, deliberate, as if unseen hands were peeling away the last barrier between me and whatever had been waiting to step inside. Click. The sound echoed through the apartment, louder than it should have been, bouncing off the walls and making my breath catch in my chest. The door did not open. Not right away. It remained still, cracked just slightly, as if whoever was on the other side was waiting, giving me one final moment to realize that this was the end. That no matter what I did, no matter how fast I ran, no matter how many locks I placed between myself and whatever this was, it had already won. The silence stretched unbearably thin, stretching into something so unnatural that my entire body seized with the overwhelming sense that I was no longer in control of what happened next. And then, without warning, the door slammed open. The force sent a shockwave through the apartment, the gust of air knocking over picture frames, the sheer violence of the motion so unnatural that my vision blurred for a split second. And then I saw it. The figure. No, not a figure, a presence. Something so impossibly dark that it seemed to pull the light out of the room, warping reality around it, a silhouette of something that should not exist. It was too tall, its limbs too long, its head tilting at an unnatural angle as it stepped forward. The moment it moved, the temperature in the apartment plummeted, the air so cold it sent painful needles of ice through my skin. And then, before I could scream, before I could run, before I could even think, it lunged. The moment it lunged, the world around me collapsed into darkness. Not the kind of darkness that comes with nightfall, not the absence of light, but something deeper, something alive. It swallowed everything, the walls, the furniture, even the air itself. I could feel it seeping into my skin, wrapping around me like a second layer, something cold, something unnatural. My breath hitched, my body paralyzed, the overwhelming sense of something inside me now, something breaking through. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being taken. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember if I even could. The only sound was the distorted hum, a static-filled vibration crawling through the empty void, an unnatural, inhuman frequency that I felt in my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, I was back. Sitting at my desk. My laptop still open, my screen still glowing. Had it happened? Had it been real? My apartment was silent, untouched, unchanged. But the air was wrong. Still. Heavy. Watching. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my fingers slick with sweat, my stomach twisting violently as I turned the screen toward me. A new notification. A new video. My heart nearly stopped. It was from my own YouTube channel. The title sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. Live now, the final transmission. My breath came in shallow gasps, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. I never started a live stream. I never hit record. My hands moved on their own, my fingers tapping the screen, opening the feed. And then, as the video flickered to life, the last remnants of sanity I had left shattered into a million pieces. It was me. Sitting exactly where I was, in real time, staring at my phone, my face frozen in sheer terror. And behind me, the door was opening. The screen glitched, the image distorting, the colors bleeding into one another as something stepped into frame. The figure. The thing that had been hunting me. My breath caught, my entire body locking up as I watched it move, too smooth, too precise, too unnatural. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was reaching for me. And then, the feed cut to static. My screen flickered. My reflection distorted. And then, in the silence, in the overwhelming suffocating void of sound, I heard it. A whisper. A breath. A voice that did not belong to me. Now they see you too. The screen flashed one last time before it went completely black. And that's when I felt the fingers on my shoulder.